In the USA, where the major pharmaceutical companies are all headquartered, certain medical interventions came into being on the back of emergency use authorizations, which might turn out to be of questionable legality. This is something which has been raised a couple of times by US defense lawyer Robert Barnes in his live streams with David Freiheit, Viva Frei. He's never gone into any great detail on the subject. I can also not go into any great detail myself, not being a lawyer, but I can look at the relevant stuff. Emergency Use Authorization. Under Section 564 of the Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act, when the Secretary of Health and Human Services declares that an emergency use authorization is appropriate, FDA may authorize unapproved medical products or unapproved uses of approved medical products to be used in an emergency. That would then be the Federal Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act, authorization for medical products for use in emergencies. Criteria for an issuance of authorization. That, based on the totality of scientific evidence available to the Secretary, including data from adequate and well-controlled clinical trials if available, it is reasonable to believe that the known and potential benefits of the product when used to diagnose, prevent or treat such disease or condition outweigh the known and potential risks of the product. That might be open to question. How sure were we that the potential risks of an experimental product outweighed the potential benefits? That objection might be a little bit wishy-washy, but more interesting does follow. So again, it is reasonable to believe that there is no adequate, approved and available alternative to the product for diagnosing, preventing or treating such disease or condition. Definitely more interesting. There were two therapeutic drugs, which I'm not going to be naming, but people know the ones I'm talking about, which did at least have potential. So dealing with those criteria in reverse order, the first one is available. We know they were available, but then so was paracetamol and the like, and you wouldn't refuse an emergency use authorization on the basis of the availability of paracetamol, so we need a bit more. The second one is approved. The drugs in question, which I'm not going to be naming here again, and which might or might not begin with an I and an H, were approved. They weren't approved for the use in question, but that isn't specified in the legislation. It simply says approved, and that lack of specificity might mean that the point of approval is one overall of safety rather than anything else, and that was the case. And also, if another drug was approved for the use in question, why would you need an emergency use authorization for another drug? That wouldn't make a lot of sense. So the approved bit here might be relevant because it might well be about safety more than anything else. And the third one is adequate. This one goes to the actual effectiveness with regard to the matter at hand of the alternative therapeutics. Okay, available, approved, now actually effective for the task at hand. And the word adequate is actually quite a low bar to cross. It doesn't say powerfully effective, it simply says adequate, sufficient. And the literature that was available around this time, basically for the whole of 2020, before certain alternative medications came along, that literature which was available, on the basis of that you could make a case that these alternative therapeutics were actually reasonably adequate. So, available, we can tick that box. Approved, we can tick that box on the basis that said drugs were generally approved in terms of safety. Not for the specific use at hand, but that is not specified. Adequate, and that deals with the problem of lack of specific approval. You could probably at least make a case for the adequacy of the drugs on the basis of what was known at the time. So we can potentially tick that box as well. And so, based on the totality of scientific evidence available to the Secretary, including data from adequate and well-controlled clinical trials if available, and note that it says if available there, it doesn't say that clinical trial data is a necessity, simply to use it if it's available. If available, it is reasonable to believe that there is no adequate, approved and available alternative to the product for diagnosing, preventing or treating such disease or condition. It may be the case that there were adequate, approved and available alternatives, in which case the emergency use authorizations would be illegal. And one more thing. Conditions of authorization. This relates to healthcare professionals administering the product, i.e. the nurses, and individuals to whom the product is administered, i.e. the recipients. And the same conditions actually apply to both. Appropriate conditions designed to ensure that individuals to whom the product is administered are informed of the significant known and potential benefits and risks of such use, and of the extent to which such benefits and risks are unknown. Have all the administering nurses to date said to the recipients as they prepare the product, well, you do know that there are risks involved and there will be risks as well which as yet we are not aware of. Are you happy to proceed on that basis? I bet they all have not made that clear. In fact, I will radically lower the bar and ask, has there been one single instance of an administering nurse saying that to a patient? I'll bet to date there has not even been one. So you cannot get an emergency use authorization if there are adequate, approved and available alternatives, and the EUA is illegally administered if the administering nurses don't inform the recipients of the significant known and potential benefits and risks of such use and of the extent to which such benefits and risks are unknown. So I wonder if some kind of retrospective legal consequences aren't available to be brought against governments who gave out these emergency use authorizations when they weren't really in a position to do so and ended up administering them potentially illegally.